Lecture 12, The Future of Islam. So the lecturer goes into quite a few topics, but again, I'm kind of hitting the high points. He describes in fairly graphic detail the sort of the Muslim reaction to 9/11. Until 9/11 occurred, I guess you would say that the things were looking up in a way. There was starting to be a bit more understanding in the West about who Muslims are, what the Islamic faith means, and sort of building those bridges. But when 9/11 occurred, everything sort of shifted back to the old assumptions about what Islam is. That the assumption that that these extremists are Muslim, so all Muslims must be just as violent, just as primitive, and we should therefore react against all Muslims. As it turns out, Muslims themselves, especially in America, were just as outraged by what had happened as we were. To quote a coalition of American Muslim groups, American Muslims utterly condemn the vicious and cowardly acts of terrorism against innocent civilians. We join with all Americans in calling for the swift apprehension and punishment of the perpetrators. No political cause can ever be assisted by such immoral acts. So, I mean, Muslims were on our side in that case, and somewhat perturbingly, I mean, meanwhile, Christian groups are indicating that this is vindication from God for all of for LGBT groups and abortionists and feminists. So, not So, as it if you look at the tenets of the Muslim faith, I mean, they're specifically against everything that the terrorists did on that day. The Quran indicates quite specifically that jihad can only be called upon but by a recognized head of state, and that it is only a defensive measure. So you cannot wage an offensive war and adhere to the tenets of Islam. It's not in there. Non-combatants and their property are off limits in a actual Islamic war, and the fatwas that were issued by the terrorists are invalid because the Muslim clergy was not involved. So it's really unfortunate that there's not more, I guess, awareness that this isn't a Muslim issue. This is a terrorism issue, much like the Christians bombing abortion clinics. This is not something which represents the whole of Islam. So these acts also sort of exacerbated a lot of internal strife in the Muslim faith, just questions of how they should proceed in the 21st century. Should the faith adapt to sort of integrate itself with the West, or should it strive to stay true to its Quranic core and resist what's referred to as West toxification? Is the top-down theocratic view of Islam compatible with democracy, which is rule from below, compatible with rule from above, as indicated by the traditional Muslim hierarchy? Can capitalism have a place in Islam? The Prophet himself was a merchant, so you'd think that would be a reasonably compatible system to work within the faith. But there's a lot of concern about what does that capitalism bring in? Does it bring in the greed, the other trappings of capitalism, which are contrary to the five pillars themselves? And you get the feeling that the whole lecture has been leading up to the last few minutes in which Esposito talks about the balance of Muslims as they live in the West, as they have to coexist with a set of people who share a lot of history and worship the same God, but have very fundamentally different belief systems in many ways. And so just trying to think about how the faith can change in order to coexist more peacefully. He also brings up the point that, that Islam is sort of where Christianity and Judaism were, a few centuries ago. That they've kind of, worn off the rough edges, and now Islam is in the position in which it has to sort of adapt quickly, which is not really a classically easy thing for religions to do. They've got to advance much more quickly than either of their cohorts to kind of bring themselves into the world mainstream, if you will. So that's the end of the content-driven statements I would make here. For me personally, I had studied Islam a bit with one of Esposito's previous books. You can find previous blog entries about that from about a decade ago at this point. This has been pretty informative. It has some quality issues. The lecturer is somewhat stiff at times. He's big into hand motions. He delivers his message very cleanly and very practically, but it does come off as somewhat dry at times. I also watched the video version of this, and there was I did not feel that there was a whole lot that the video added that I didn't just get from this straight up text. So this is all presented at a very, very high level. He's sweeping through centuries and centuries of history in essentially 6 hours. So it's kind of to be expected. It's just that I think it loses some of its magic. It might have been more interesting to have more specific detail to make it more personally relatable, rather than skimming across it at such a high level that you just kind of lose some of the flavor of it. So at any rate, I hope that this has been a helpful overview. I would encourage you, if you have an interest in this, to go to the great courses. They've got dozens and dozens and dozens, hundreds of great courses on this and a lot of other things. So I would encourage you to check them out, fortify your brain, and lay off the cat videos and the Kim Kardashian stories for a while, and go fill your mind with something new and interesting. So, at any rate, until next time, happy reading.